Welcome back to Level Up, Fair Housing, Part 2.
Alexia, you were talking about equity in people's homes and the inability to pass that on to future generations. There's been a lot of talk about appraisals and whether appraisals are fair for all people. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Well, again, we have to go back to the history. I mean, starting about 100 years ago, the appraisal industry and the real estate industry, which were working hand in glove, associated race with property values. And that was built into government programs. That's what created redlining. It was in our code of ethics that, we will not sell homes to a person of a race whose presence in that neighborhood might lower property values. There was no evidence for that claim, but that became law. It became, what we all agreed was true. And so the result of those policies was that banks didn't invest in those areas. Redlining, mortgages were denied. Cities zoned those areas for industrial and commercial use. People were overcrowded in those areas because of racially restrictive covenants. They weren't allowed to live anywhere else. So the property values in those areas did decline. It wasn't because of the presence of people of color. It was because of these policies that made sure those areas would not be able to grow and develop while protecting property values with things like single-family zoning in the white neighborhoods. So today, when you appraise neighborhoods, that all those historical layers are built in. Even if an appraiser, does a perfect job, that's still there. But yeah, we're getting more news reports and studies that the presence of a person of color in a home may lower certain appraisals, and that's an issue that we're grappling with in our advocacy team right now.
And Jennifer, your committee has been working with the Valuation and addressing these issues. What are you all doing on that?
So yes, we've been working with the Valuation Committee at length. We have a work group that we've been meeting for over a year now and making recommendations of education, people that may sit on certain foundations and boards that will have an impact on this. And education, that's the biggest thing. People sometimes don't realize they have these biases. Mm-hmm. They have to admit that they have them and see them. And sometimes we have to point them out so that we can correct this. Because if you know you have a bias, you can adjust for it. And this is important about, it's education.
Mm-hmm. So Cher, how can we integrate fair housing into the normal course of business?
We're about to have the 5th anniversary for C2EX, and it's an opportunity to put the Fairhaven piece as one of a new module. This is an opportunity to help people become more aware of how they interact and their relationships with clients as well as customers and consumers. And even more importantly, if we come up with referral processes where we're not fearful of saying, I got 3 choices for San Francisco and 1 person is of color and 2 are white, and being afraid, well, what if my client would be uncomfortable? Are we going to have that fear? Are we going to quit having that bias and stop relating race to race, even in our own businesses? And I think that speaks to the bias you spoke about.
So when I first joined NAR and that New York Newsday story came out, one of the first things I said we need to do is we need to attack this from several fronts. We need to ensure greater accountability, greater culture change, and better training, right? And we called that effort ACT, an acronym for those things. One of the most successful elements of that, Cher just mentioned, the Fairhaven training. Alexia, you worked on that. In a nutshell, what does Fairhaven teach?
Fairhaven is an immersive online simulation experience where you go into a fictional town and you're selling houses. You're working against the clock. And in these realistic scenarios, which we created based on real fair housing cases, you'll confront the many different ways that discrimination can enter into a real estate transaction. Now, it might not be the realtor that is the problem. It might be the seller. It might be a condo board. And you'll have to consider and work your way through all these different scenarios. We also wanted to, as Jen said, get to the heart of fair housing and really inspire an emotional reaction. So we also flip the script and put you in the shoes of a home buyer who's trying to buy a house and is facing discrimination. You'll have to go through a scenario in their shoes. And then you'll see a video testimonial of real people who have experienced housing discrimination. And the reactions that we've gotten from members has been that it's had them in tears, it's had them angry, and it's really motivating them to commit to this work.
And share the reaction in Tennessee has been positive to Fairhaven?
Very positive,
Yeah.
yes. And we try with all of our committees now, we want to do the three-prong approach, which is the implicit bias training, which is pretty exciting. I know we're going to be doing some new things there. And then the Fairhaven and At Home with Diversity. We want our members who are leading other members to have an awareness of what's going on. And we do the Newsday study. I think it's such a powerful thing. And my first comment is always, when you watch this is not about New York. This is about us.
Yeah.
And this could happen to any city in this country or any association. If the same thing came in, same testing, blind study, we'd all fail. There would be very few successful brokers who could stand that test.
And do you feel, Jen, that it's changed the culture, the greater emphasis on fair housing the last few years?
I do, and I am from New York, and I was in leadership when the Newsday release broke, and I will tell you that my leadership team and myself, we watched that and we cried.
Yes.
And it is so moving when you see how people were treated and how it went down a slippery slope so quickly. And when the testers got together at the end and they talked, they cried on camera because some of them didn't know they were discriminated against.
Yes.
But as real estate professionals, we could see it happening. And you just really wanted to reach through and say, stop and do this correctly. So we retooled everything. We went through and retooled education, and just brought that all together. But they ripped the Band-Aid off the problem that we had. And now look where we are. More of a dedication to fair housing, more bringing it forward.
Agreed.
And Alexia, self-testing was part of the accountability effort. In light of what Cher and Jennifer shared, how can self-testing help? What is it, first of all, and how does that help?
So as part of our ACT initiative, we launched a self-testing program. This is where a broker can bring testers in voluntarily to test their own agents and see what's going on, receive a confidential report, and follow-up training. We have just completed a pilot of this program, delivered the report to the broker, went in and trained her agents, and it was a very positive experience for everyone. I have to say, people's eyes were opened. We had a really robust conversation afterwards. We've got a lot of interest from other brokers, and we're going to be ramping up this program next year.
So it's a great opportunity for folks to see how their agents are operating without having to have a newspaper do it for them.
That's
And
right.
is there any repercussion?
No, it's all confidential.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's
And they can
really
do
great.
tailored training based on what they find. So I think that's really helpful.
And in fact, NAR doesn't even see it. It's only the broker sees it. They can choose to show it to us if they want to.
So 3x30 and the Black Homeownership Collaborative. I know, Jennifer, this is something the Fair Housing Policy Committee has been interested in and has supported. And out of our advocacy team in Washington, we've really been engaging with all the partners on this Black Homeownership Collaborative. This is the effort to create 3 million new Black homeowners by 2030. And so we've got partners. Alexia, you want to share some of these partners? We've got Mortgage Bankers Association, National Fair Housing Alliance, National Urban League. There are plenty of them, but there's a 7-point plan. You want to speak to what some of these different approaches are to increasing Black home ownership?
Absolutely. So this initiative is focused on closing that stubborn 30-point gap. And while we acknowledge that there are barriers among all groups, the gap between black and white is the one that just isn't closing. And so the 7-point plan that we've developed with our partners includes things like down payment assistance, access to credit, fair housing enforcement. It's also a marketing campaign, letting folks know that home ownership is available, that dispelling myths, like you don't necessarily need a 20% down payment.
Yeah, and increased housing production too,
Absolutely.
because without the housing, costs for housing are high. So all of those things are critically important, and glad that you're part of that effort to work with those groups. Well, I think that was a great overview of what NAR is doing. So thank you all for joining me in this conversation. For more information, go to nar.realtor/fair housing.
Level Up, the real story from realtors.